I shall not see happiness again. That was the closing line of our first reading. That's Job. I don't know how much you know about Job, but he, I think, has every reason to think that he will not see happiness again. He has pretty much lost his livelihood. Marauders and bandits have come and taken all his animals and other things. A natural disaster has killed his sons and daughters and their wives and husbands, and he is sick. He's been afflicted with a terrible disease, and he's been like this for a little while. And so he's feeling low, very low. And if you find yourself in a similar position someday, you're not feeling, as perky as you might want to just look up that passage, and maybe you could empathize with Job. The question is, what do you do when those things happen? Because, of course, they will happen to us. Perhaps nothing quite as extreme as what Job endured, but certainly we all have those moments in our lives, those incidents in our lives. A phone call we don't want to receive, a doctor's diagnosis we don't want to hear, some other tragedy, or just a seriously broken relationship. Those things, when they happen, what do we do with our faith? Where is our faith in the midst of that? I'm not the first to ask this question, of course. It is a common question. It's been talked about and debated for literally thousands of years. The book of Job, in many respects, was written as a way to sort of address this question. And I'd like to take a moment to go through it with you a little bit, because I think it's important. This will be a deeper homily than we're used to, but I can tell you up front, it is a critical thing for you to work out. So two things will help us get started. One, there is a tendency when you are looking at something like this to turn it into simply a question looking for a single answer. So it's like an academic exercise, a mathematical proof, something like that. You're looking for the answer to this question. And certainly you can find lots of people who will give you one on YouTube, in books, all that sort of thing. As you'll find when we get to the end of this, I don't actually think that's a good approach. I don't think you want to start by thinking of this as an academic exercise, as a right or wrong question. There's a better way to look at it. Second, before we get too far along, it's helpful just to recognize a tension that exists between two things that we believe. We believe that God is in control, that he's sovereign, that he is all-powerful. And we also believe that God has given humanity, free will. And those two things don't exactly dance together very well, because it would seem logically to many that if God is in complete control, then I can't possibly have any free will, because God knows everything. God knows what I'm going to do, and how is it possible for me to have free will? And those two ideas that we believe, they sort of, as I said, tension, I think, is a good word for it. And that tension would allow you to understand the two, if you will, major ways of looking at the issue. Probably the most common for people who have thought it out, and indeed even common for people who haven't given this much thought, is to hold on to God is in control. You'd appreciate, it's a terrific feeling to know that, oh yeah, no matter how bad things gets, God's in control. That's nice. And so what they tend to do, lots of variations of this, but a way to approach it is simply to say, well, you see, God's in control, and of course God is God, and he's got the big picture in mind, and so lousy things that happen to you and I, those are just little blips on the radar, but it all works out. It all works together for something good. A common way of expressing this is that God paints beautiful pictures, draws beautiful pictures with crooked lines. Those crooked lines include our tragedies, if you will, but it all works out in a beautiful picture. That is a fine way of looking at it. I know lots of people who hold to that belief. But if I could point out to you something that I think is critically important about that view, a lot of people find that to be a wonderful viewpoint until it happens to them. In other words, it's another thing to say, oh, the hurricane hit the other coast and look at all the destruction. And to say that, oh, yes, well, in the big picture, it'll all work out, that sort of thing. That's pretty easy to say. It's a little harder for a lot of people to say that when it is their town that has been struck by the hurricane. It is their house that has been destroyed. A little harder to say, look at the rubble and say, yeah, okay, God, I know, you're in control. It's all going to work out. I know lots of people who were unable to do that when the moment came. The other approach is, if you will, to go to the other side of that tension, and that is to sort of emphasize, if you will, human choice. You say, well, the reason I read about a teenager who got killed by a drunk driver in an automobile accident, the reason that happened is simply because we live in a fallen world, and fallen people make bad choices. And so some person went into a bar and made the choice to drink too much, and then made another bad choice to get into a car, and that caused the accident. And so you sort of, if you will, talk about suffering in terms of human frailty. And that's a fine way of looking at this problem. It does so, if you'll notice, seems to divorce God from it. God just seems to disappear out of an approach like that. That might be its flaw, if you will. So this is the point at which you're expecting me to tell you, okay, let me tell you the answer. And I have no intentions of doing that. Because again, I don't know that this is best approached as an answer, a question and an answer. Because you have to come up with a way by which to look at this that will stick with you. Because here's the problem. What will happen to a lot of people when they are dealing with this is they will inadvertently sometimes end up with God out there. In other words, you believe, to go back to the example, you believe God is in control. Well, God's in control, and something terrible has happened to you. And so you look at God out there and you say, why are you doing this to me? And the point is that that is not what you need in that moment. You don't need a God who is out there. You need a God who is standing next to you. You need a God who is sitting next to you when the doctor tells you the bad news. You need a God that's sitting next to you when you get that phone call that you did not want to receive. This question is not about sort of theology, if you will. This question is about a relationship. What is it that will allow you to have a close relationship with God? So close that you will not feel in any way abandoned when lousy things happen. For some people, that relationship is built on the fact that God is in control, and that's a wonderful way of doing it. For other people, the relationship is built more on the fact that, Lord, I am stuck here in fallen humanity. I need your help. And that's how they get God close to them. Over the course of my lifetime and my spiritual journey, I have chosen all sorts of different variations of this in different moments of my life where I have felt the need, been in the midst of some tragedy, if you will, or some low moments. I've done all sorts of different ways to make sure that God is next to me and not out there. This is a relationship issue. If you ever take the time to read the book of Job, it's kind of a long book and it gets pretty bogged down in places, but you'll start to figure out that near the end especially, Job ends up with a relationship with God, and it is that relationship that sustains him. That's what you and I need, because there is no doubt about it. No matter whether you have lived a life with very few of those little bumps in the road, or maybe you have lived a life with lots of them, maybe you're in the midst of a huge dip in the road, you're at a low point. It's going to happen to all of us, and we want to have God with us in those moments. The idea is not to build your relationship in such a way so that as long as everything's good, God's around, and then when things go badly, God disappears. That's not a relationship that's helpful to you, to me, to anyone. So if I could encourage you, think about this. Give it some thought. How is it that you, just you, not the guy on the YouTube video, you, how is it that you can approach this question of God and suffering so that the Lord is always with you when those trials happen?